At the moment, international diplomacy resembles a sort of high-stakes game of three-dimensional chess. And on the American side, it's being fronted by a remarkably small cast of people. So we learn that Steve Witkoff and Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State and the Special Envoy for many issues for President Trump, are travelling to Paris to discuss where they are with the Ukrainian peace proposals. That will be interesting. The fact that they're coming to Paris and bringing the Europeans into the discussion is very welcome, I'm sure, to the Europeans who have been kept out of it until now. And it may indicate that there is something specific, something a bit more hopeful to talk about. However, I mean, Moscow has been throwing its weight against that idea and making it very clear that they don't think they're very near to a peace deal at all. So we'll see what comes out of that. But also, they're bound to be talking about Iran because the Europeans have a big interest in what happens in Iran. They're also bound to be talking about Gaza. And they're also bound to be talking about the upcoming NATO summit at the end of June, which, believe me, may turn into a humdinger because it may provide the focus for a whole series of global issues between the Europeans and the United States. And we'll see how that goes at the time. Meanwhile, in Ukraine, of course, the war goes on whatever happens in Paris. And in Ukraine, the ongoing nature of the war means it's a matter of attacks, nightly attacks. This was an attack, a big drone attack on Odessa last night. And there's both a political and a strategic rationale to that. The political rationale, one guesses, is the fact that yesterday afternoon, Mark Rutte of NATO, the NATO Secretary-General, and Zelensky were in Odessa having talks and making statements. And a few hours later, this big drone attack was made on Odessa overnight. And the strategic rationale, of course, is that Odessa is a really important port. It's an important port for getting all of the grain out of Ukraine and opening up to the world markets. It's important for Ukraine not to be landlocked. Now, during the grain deal from 2022 to 2023, a corridor was established, a safe corridor that grain could come out from. But the Russians wouldn't go along with that after summer of 2023. But since then, the Ukrainians have basically cleared the Russians out of the western part of the Black Sea. Sevastopol, the base of the Black Sea Fleet, is not now usable by the Russians, and they've moved almost all of their fleet to Novorossiysk in the Russian part of the peninsula, and so that they cannot now operate in the western part of the Black Sea. Nevertheless, it's not entirely safe, and so what the Ukrainians have done is open up a corridor, like this green corridor, that runs right the way down the coast to get their grain out to Istanbul and the Bosphorus and onto the world markets via the Mediterranean. So they can use the sea corridor. So why are the Russians attacking Odessa and the other ports like Chornomorsk in the same area? Because they're trying to destroy the facilities that the Ukrainians are using to load the ships. The Ukrainians have got their shipping back to pre-war levels, not their tonnages, but the amount of ships that go backwards and forwards. So the only way that the Russians can intercept this, in effect, is to go for the ports themselves, and they're doing that on a pretty regular basis. So if the Paris talks don't indicate that we are close to some sort of ceasefire deal or some sort of truce, the expectation, increasing expectation, is that the war will go on in pretty much the ways it has done in the last 24 hours.